Call me, boot me, if you want to reach me. Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 3 of Jumping in an Elevator, the podcast where I look into the stuff that you can't be bothered researching yourself. And this episode, very excited. I did a lot of research for this one. And also, slightly unrelated but also related, I found my mum's old flip phone. For the people listening that can't see me, ready? How satisfying is that? Ready? I'll be like, oh, what's that? Yeah, well, I own 51% of this company. So satisfying, right? So I actually want to make a video about this phone, but I don't know if that's something that people actually want to watch. Like in my head, I'm envisaging something where I upload a video called I found my mum's old flip phone, and it's just me closing the flip phone. Like, I just love that sound. Ready? It's just like, oh, this is such the buffoonery in your statement. Like, sometimes I sassily hang up on my sister, which drives her mental. But imagine if I could do it with that. I could just be like, keep it to yourself. Boom. Fantastic. So apologies for taking 2 weeks between episode 2 and episode 3. The reason for that is basically I wasn't having a good time. It was a bit of a stressful week with work and everything. And I wasn't really in a good headspace. And I didn't really have much prep done for this. And I was like, I don't want to rush it. So I took a little bit more time, did a lot of research, feeling much better, which is fantastic. And we loved that. I don't know if that will be a regular thing. Hopefully not. My goal is every week. But if a topic requires a bit more research, then I don't mind taking an extra week in between episodes. This episode is called Call Me, Beat Me If You Want to Reach Me. And that is a reference to Kim Possible. But it's also a reference at what we're talking about. So call me, beat me if you want to reach me. Call me, beat me if you want to reach me. Doesn't matter. I'm going to stop there. But that's all about making phone calls, right? You want Kim Possible, you got to call her. She said, call me, beat me if you want to reach me on my flip phone. And we're talking about how wireless works. So how does Wi-Fi work? How does mobile data work? How does GPS work? How does Shazam work? And I've also got a fun little set of Kim Possible facts here and controversies. And then somewhere in here, I'm going to be talking about some of my stuff from my thesis because it's sort of related to this. So get ready for that. Something is weird with the microphone because I moved to a different room and I also bought a light. So if you're watching this, you're like, wow, I can see all of his pores. Those pores need paw. That's because this new room, the lighting is very yellow. Woof, so yellow. So I bought this cheap light thing. And somewhere along the line, when I moved the stuff into the room, the microphone did something. And I don't know what. But usually like I have to crank up the, what's it called? Hard limiter. It's like an effect on Premiere Pro. And this time the microphone is just loud and the quality is a bit lower. So I'll see if I can fix that. Anyway, not that you care. Let's just be real about that. So I just wanted to mention that the next episode, so this particular episode is very like tech heavy, right? There is some pop culture stuff in here, but it's mainly tech stuff. The next episode is like the opposite. It's all pop culture. And if everything goes well, there is a potential for a very, very, very special guest. So if I were you, I'd be getting excited for that. And it's all about pop music mainly. Probably going to be talking about other stuff, but mainly pop music from the early 10s. So if you remember, I did a video about 2009 and I talked about the music and TV and movies and all of that. This podcast episode next week is about 2010, 11, 12, however far we get. So if you have any questions about that or any thoughts or things that you think we should cover, we as in not just me, hopefully, then feel free to let me know in the comments on the YouTube video or on Instagram. You can send me a message. So what are today's questions? Well, I kind of went through them already. Spoiled it. Teehee. Let's go through this first one. How does Wi-Fi work? So Wi-Fi, I remember when I say like Wi-Fi. I can do a presenter voice. I can say Wi-Fi. Or if I'm with my friends, Wi-Fi. But if I'm doing a presentation, it's Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi, da-na-da-na, da-na-da-na-na. Can I focus? Let me just, there we go. Wi-Fi doesn't stand for wireless fidelity. At some point in time, I thought that that was just canon. I thought that was headcanon. I was shipping wireless and fidelity together. The ship name was Wi-Fi. And to me, that made sense. And apparently to everyone that makes sense, but it's not the case. Because I did research and Wi-Fi is owned by the Wi-Fi Alliance, which is so the name Wi-Fi is a registered trademark. And it specifically means Wireless Local Area Network, or WLAN. That's what Wi-Fi is. So you have WLAN products that are based on the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, IEEE. So if you're an engineering student, you probably know about IEEE. So that's the definition of what Wi-Fi accreditation is. It's not saying, oh, wireless fidelity. No, it's like, how crazy is that? The Wi-Fi Alliance. And then they put, like, you know, when you buy a router or whatever, and it has a sticker that says that it has the Wi-Fi thingy, and there's like a special how it looks logo thing. That's the Wi-Fi Alliance logo. So I wonder how much money they're making. They'd be making bank because everything needs that. So Wi-Fi transmits, I don't know if transmit's the best word. Yeah, let's just go with transmits. It transmits data using radio waves. I didn't know that. There's a lot of stuff that I didn't know. Surprising. But that's one of the key things that drives me absolutely mental about social media and everything like that, because you see all these people, right? And they have all this energy and stuff, and yet they just take that stuff for granted. It's like, don't you want to know how everything works? Like, I don't know. I don't want that to sound like it's condescending, like it's weird if you don't want to know how it works. But I think it's so interesting that we're kind of conditioned to not care how our phone works or how Twitter works. All we care about is what Jeremiah Starfish tweeted on Twitter. You know what I mean? Is that not just a little bit interesting? Much to think about. Where was I? Wi-Fi. So it's radio waves, and radio waves on the electromagnetic spectrum, you have, I need to remember my lefts and rights because my left hand looks like my right hand on the camera, but then I flip it when I'm editing. So I don't know. And to the Miss Ma'ams listening, that means absolutely nothing to you. But let's say the low end of the spectrum is radio, then you have infrared, then you have visible light, and then you blah, 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 higher stuff. So we can't see radio waves because radio waves are not inside the visible spectrum, but they are around. And that is frightening to me because there's so much like stuff, right? How crazy is that? We can see stuff, we can see colors and everything because it fits into a specific set of, like, it's in the visible light spectrum, like a bunch of frequencies in that range, and each color has a different frequency, blah, 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 blah. But radio waves are just like around us and we can't see them. Imagine if you could see radio waves. That kind of makes me want to throw up. Oh my God, I actually got like the throw up feeling just then. Let me call the doctor. Hang on, let's put that into the microphone. Yeah. I'm thinking about radio waves. Thanks. So that range for radio waves is 30 hertz to 300 gigahertz. And that is, as I said, it's low. And when I say low, I mean it has a relatively low frequency compared to visible light. And low frequency means large wavelength. So if you don't know what wavelength is, what's a good way of explaining that? I guess if you're taking steps, actually, that's kind of a good analogy. If you're walking, right? Actually, no, that doesn't really make sense at all, but I'll keep going with it. So if you're walking and you're taking big steps, right? Then when you're running, you're taking little steps. That's almost how it works. You're going faster, but you're taking little steps. Larger wavelength means lower frequency. And that's on hertz. So I went onto a website called How Stuff Works, which I've mentioned multiple times in this podcast. It's such a good website. And I did a bunch of research into how Wi-Fi communicates between me sending the bippity boppity boo and you receiving the bippity bop, and then you sending a bippity bop back and me getting that bippity boppity bang, you know? So a computer has a wireless adapter that translates data into a radio signal and transmits it using an antenna. So you be typing, right? Beepity bop. Then your computer says, hang on, let me just turn this into some ones and zeros, or more accurately, let me modulate that wave and send it off. And then that gets converted back and sent to the internet. The internet is like a whole nother thing. Oh, internet stress. Am I right, ladies? Or am I right? So the wireless router receives the signal and decodes it. So if you're in Australia and you have the NBN, you have an NBN router or an NBN box or whatever, and that's connected to the internet with los cables. I wonder what cables is in Spanish. If Spanish people are listening to this or watching this, please let me know what the cables is in Spanish. So the router sends the information to the internet using a physical wide Ethernet connection, and Wi-Fi is transmitted at frequencies of 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz. I mentioned that because our internet at home where I am now, I have two networks that I can connect to. There's the normal one and there's the dash 5G. And 5G in that sense does not mean 5G like, whoa, conspiracy 5G. It just means the 5 gigahertz as opposed to the 2.4 gigahertz. I think the difference is the 5 gigahertz one, since it's a higher frequency, the wavelength is smaller, which means that the connection isn't as strong at longer distances. So I guess maybe if you're closer to the router, it's better to use the 5G, but then that could also be wrong. It's something to do with bandwidth. Miss Girl, I don't know. So the frequency is considerably higher than the frequency used for cell phones, walkie-talkies, and televisions, and the high frequency allows the signal to carry more data. So phones and all the other bippity-boppity waves in the air. Can I stop saying bippity-boppity boo like I'm some Cinderella rat type bitch? Apologies. That's important because you have mobile waves. Doesn't sound right. Mobile waves. Waves from your phone, and then you have waves from Wi-Fi, and they're on different spectrums, so they're not really going to interfere with each other. Or like your microwave is not like, whoa, let me send some texts. Imagine if you could text from the microwave. That seems like something that definitely exists and is so pointless and dumb. That's my brand though, pointless and dumb. Actually, no, that's not true. I need to be more like sure in my abilities. And the high frequency carrying more data thing, I don't fully understand that. It's got something to do with how the wave is modified and how it carries data, but there's more of that in a second. Actually, not in a second, right now. So the data deceived by the Wi-Fi router. Sorry, listening people. I just keep shutting this phone. It's such an addiction. It's, oh my God. Let me shut the phone. So the data received by the Wi-Fi router is modulated using OFDM, which is orthogonal frequency division modulation. What the fuck does that mean? Basically, I think it's another way of doing FM and AM. So when you're in the vehicle, you're in your car, you're in your Tesla, talking to myself in a year's time when I'm going to be on that Tesla money, hopefully, putting that into the universe. And you're listening to the radio and you have FM and AM. You know how, actually, that's interesting how FM's like the cool lit channels and then AM is like weird sport and old people news? Or is that just like a Perth thing? I don't know. FM means frequency modulation and AM means amplitude modulation. It's different ways of encoding the information, I think. So yeah, Wi-Fi uses OFDM. This next sentence, I'm not really sure about. It says these packets of data are tagged with the physical address of the receiving device and it is broadcasted. So my understanding of that is you send a message, it goes to your friend sends a message back. It's sent through the internet cable to the router. The router has the address of the connection or the package, has the address of the package of data. And it gives that to everyone that's connected to the Wi-Fi network. But if you don't know what the address is of the data packet, then you can't decode it. Which for me, does that raise the question of how are these things not hacked? But then it kind of makes sense because when you join a public network, everyone's always like, oh, we'll never do banking on a public network, never da-da-da-da-da on the Starbucks Wi-Fi. And I wonder if that's why, because everyone could have access to that information if they knew how to decode the signal. So maybe that's a little personal project that I'll go into, just hacking people's bank details at Starbucks. So how is the data sent? The modulation systems, I'm not really going to get into that. I don't fully understand, to be honest. That's the reason. Amplitude is so if you have a wave like this, she's wavy, and you cut the amplitude or you make the amplitude smaller, then the wave's going to be smaller. People listening, when you have a small amplitude, the height is smaller. So the peaks and troughs are less severe. My footing pumps severely and yours don't. And then FM is how quick the waves are to each other. So what's the best way of explaining that? I don't know. You're running fast, bitch. I don't know. I put a little break for a story in here, and I wanted to talk about my university times. I will talk about more about my thesis in a second, but I specifically remember when I was learning about waves. I learned about waves in high school, I'm pretty sure, and I was like, yeah, cool, whatever, lit. I don't give a shit. Let me just get into that uni. Let me hustle and get that 99 ATAR. And that's on having no social life. When I was at uni and I was learning about waves and stuff, my moan, she said, let me blow. It's so crazy. When you find out that your interpretation of the world is an interpretation and an interpretation can change, that's some crazy shit, right? And when you think about it, maths and science is a way of interpreting the physical world around us. So I don't know if this is true, but does that mean that there could be another interpretation of the exact same phenomena? If we met aliens and aliens had the exact same situation as we do on Earth, would they have the same equations for all that kind of stuff? Would they have the same understanding of how waves work? How crazy is that? That got really kind of deep. Let me jump it back quickly. So yeah, I was learning about waves, blah, 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 blah. And that's kind of relevant to my thesis because my thesis was about free space optical laser links. So basically, I guess that's sending information using a laser. Lasers have different frequencies to radio waves, of course, because you can see parts of the laser. That was such an interesting time in my life. It was so difficult. Working is hard, and working and doing YouTube at the same time is hard, but it's a different kind of hard. My thesis ran me into the ground, but I really enjoyed it. Whereas now I just feel like I'm running myself into the ground and not enjoying it, but I'm enjoying the YouTube stuff. So it seems like there's one part there that I'm not enjoying. Let's park that right there before I get myself in trouble. No, just kidding. But also I'm not. So when I was doing my thesis, I was also doing a design unit for final year of masters. And the reason why I brought this up is because I was talking to my friend about this the other day. When I was doing experiments for my thesis, I was in the basement of the physics building, which was fucking scary. Let's be clear on that. I'd be in the basement, no lights, no candle, no light, Zane feet Nikki. And sometimes it would be night and it's dingy. Or not that you could tell it was night because it's all underground and it's old. So then there's all these weird rooms and really tight alleyways and stuff. And I'd hardly ever see anyone. And sometimes I would need to run experiments in the lab and then go to the workshop and like cut something, right? Or drill a fucking hole or whatever. Because, you know, I'm all about hardware like that. I said, let me get that drill. Let me drill that hole, right? So one time I was walking to the hardware area from the laser lab and I saw my tutor from my design tutorial. And for a little bit of context, that design class was the most stressful thing that I did during uni. Like, my thesis was stressful, but I was responsible for that. So I could kind of dictate how well it would go. So if I wanted to do really well, I could put all this extra time in. I knew what I needed to research and I knew what I didn't know, right? So then I could focus my attention and get it done. This design class was so chaotic and also, in my opinion, poorly managed that you could do so much work and then you give it and the people marking it didn't even know what the right answer was because they weren't told what to look for, right? And that was the worst. That remains one of the worst units I ever did at university. And if by some chance that lecturer is listening to this, I still want my design journal back, Mr. Sir. God, that triggers me so much. Anyway, the tutor of my class, I liked him. He was cool. He was like this old Russian guy and he was very soft-spoken, but he was very, very smart. And I love those kind of people, right? When they're not loud about it, but you have a question, you ask them, and they're like, hang on, and they write a bunch of shit down and they explain it in like a sentence, and you're like, wait, you kind of spilled. Let me listen again. So he was the teacher of the class, and he didn't really say much. He didn't know anything about him. And one time I was in the physics lab and I was walking to the hardware section, and he was there, like this really tall, lanky Russian, like old guy, like bent over a bench. And I was like, this is a little bit frightening, first of all. But second of all, I'm intrigued. Let me go have a look. So I went and asked him and I was like, I didn't just turn on and be like, hey, what are you doing? I was like, oh, hi. I don't know why I became American. What are you up to? And he was like, oh, I'm doing my PhD. And he was doing a PhD in something like really, 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 really cool. And I was like, oh my God, that's so awesome. And we became like slight friends. Like, I don't know if we'd say exactly friends, but we were friends, but not in the sense like, oh yeah, let's go get lunch. But then like we would chat. And I worked out that he really liked weapons. So then as part of my design unit, you had to draw shit. Like draw technical diagrams. So I would draw technical diagrams of World War II weapons, and he would like be so blown away by it. He gave me 100% every week. I was like, yes, let me crack that code. Let me draw that assault rifle. Also, guns, like I said this before, I'm not a war stan, but the way guns work is really interesting, right? And I wish that much money was put into other research ventures. It seems to be like all the programs that result in weapons are the ones that get the most funding, which is kind of a flop, to be honest. So yeah, there's that little thesis story. How does phone data work? Phone data, this is a really short answer. Phone data is on a different frequency radio signal, as I said before. So I think Wi-Fi is the highest signal. And then your internet service provider has geographic cells with transmission towers that connect to satellites. So my understanding is that these towers, you probably would have heard the word triangulate before, right? I'm pretty sure they triangulate. So you have a bunch of towers that your call or your data is sent to, and then those towers communicate with satellites. And that's how, like, it goes ding, ding, ding between the towers, and then ding dong up to the satellite, and then dong ding to the other person. So that kind of explains why there's bad coverage. So we have Telstra and we have Vodafone, and I remember, and we have a bunch of other ones, but those two are the ones that I'm thinking of. I remember friends would be like, oh, Vodafone has such bad coverage, and I was like, haha, T. But I never really understood why. And now I kind of get it. It's because they didn't have as many towers. So Telstra is like the biggest one. So they have the most towers. Therefore, the coverage is better. In terms of 4G, 3G, 5G and all that, I thought the G stood for something, but it just stands for generation. So you have like third generation, fourth generation, fifth generation. My understanding of 5G, I'm not going to go too far into 5G because I know the conspiracy people are going to launch, and I'm like, I don't want that energy, right? It's like conspiracies is just selectively picking facts. That's why I only made one video that had the word conspiracy in the title, and it was barely even a bloody conspiracy. But like all the conspiracy videos on YouTube, it's fine when it's like about a celebrity or whatever, but when it's like science stuff, I'm like, you're just selectively choosing information that supports your theory. You're not looking for information that doesn't match. Anyway, that's enough of a rant about that. I'm pretty sure 5G is stronger and probably has a higher frequency, thus lower wavelength, which means there needs to be more towers. But then because it's a high frequency, you can encode more data into the signal. Like your speeds would be 1 gigabyte as opposed to 40 megabytes, which I'm pretty sure is what we have at the moment, which sounds like a lot. Don't really know about all that. And the other thing with mobile data is roaming. So you might be on a contract where if you go to Italy and you use your data, then you're going to get roaming charges, so you get roaming charges in Australia, even though you're in Italy. So you might be like, how does that work? It's because your ISP, your internet service provider, has a contract with an ISP in a different country, or they're owned by some giant conglomerate or whatever, and they have an agreement where you can use their towers and they pay that company, and then you pay your original ISP a higher rate. Also, GPS is not data. So I remember being in, when did I go to Europe? 2015, 2016. I mentioned in my most recent video that 2015, I couldn't remember anything that happened. And my mum was so quick to remind me that we went to Europe. She was like, excuse you. We went to Europe. But I was so sure that that happened in 2016. My brain said, you know what? Let me just mix up all the years. So yes, if you're on a holiday in Italy and you use GPS and you're like, oh my God, I have to use roaming data now because I use GPS. Not true. You don't have to do that. GPS is a totally different system. However, I'm pretty sure that Wi-Fi and mobile data can help make the location approximation more precise. And I have information on how GPS works, but that's after I talk about Kim Possible. See, that sentence right there, that's where I would put a sponsor. I'd be like, I have information about GPS, but first I need to talk about our sponsor for today, who is Bippity Bop. Oh my God, I said it again. The way in which I just think in like rat lines from movies. That was a mouse or a rat? It was a mouse that said it. I just think in rodent lines from Disney movies. But before we talk about Kim Possible, I wanted to talk about another story from my Italy tour, because the GPS thing reminded me when I was writing notes, reminded me that I went to Italy in 2011. And I remember, I think it was the last day or one of the last days in Venice, and I was with my friend Jake, and we had to go find this shop because, long story short, he bought a satchel that was so expensive that he got a special receipt that he could use at the airport for a tax. Something, I don't know. I'm not really good at tax, as I mentioned multiple times. But I remember that was the most chaotic day for me because we got lost. And I remember like looking at the signs and people would draw arrows on the wall for how to get to X part of the city. And we were so skeptical. We were like, is this the right way, or are we going to get kidnapped or teenage napped because we were teenagers? But see, if I had used my GPS, we wouldn't have that problem. But I remember thinking, no, I can't use GPS because that uses data. Not true. So that satchel thing, God, that was so funny. We were at that shop for so long getting this bloody frilly suede satchel. We were there for so long that the teachers were trying to call us, and the reasoning was because we were holding up the entire group because we had to go somewhere. The fucking train was leaving or some shit, and we were like, oh, let me just get this frilly suede satchel. So iconic. I asked him if he still had the satchel, and he maintains that he doesn't, but I know for a fact that he has it somewhere. So the Kim Possible facts. I've got a fun little page up here. So we're going to go through and have a little look at that. So this is 15 things you didn't know about Kim Possible. However, I knew a lot of these, and I don't really know why I knew them. It just seems like one of those things where I suddenly know a lot about Kim Possible, and it's like, where the fuck did that come from? But also, I am not mad about it. One of the fun things about it for me is that the casting and the voice stuff. So this says Rufus and Bart Simpson are voiced by the same person. So Nancy Cartwright. And then if you look at the guest voices in Kim Possible, that was stacked. And they just got a bunch of people from the Disney universe. Like Raven Simone was in it. She played Monique. Was Monique the cheerleader? No, that was Bonnie. I can't remember who Monique is. But Raven Simone played her. And then that Nancy Cartwright person also played Chucky on Rugrats. Right? It seems like women are really good at doing the voices for boys. Because she did Bart, she did Rufus, even though Rufus isn't a boy. Wait, what? Timmy Turner was voiced by a woman too? So was Tommy Pickles. So was Ash Ketchum. Wow, that's really cool. Go ladies. There's a fun fact on here that's extremely chaotic, and it says, it was used to promote Pirates of the Caribbean. And in my head, that timeline doth not match up at all. For me, Pirates of the Caribbean feels like something that's 2010, and Kim Possible's early 2000s. But then there's no way that Pirates of the Caribbean was 2010, because it was so much earlier than that. But when I look at scenes from Dead Man's Chest, Dead Man's Chest, is that how you say it? Why does that sound weird? Dead Man's Chest. Dead Man's Chest, right? Davy Jones, Mr. Jones. Davy Jones. Yeah, he had that CGI, tentacle beard shit, whatever. When you look at scenes from that movie, that CGI holds up so well. And it's a lot better than a lot of movies that came out in the last few years. And I'm like, what was the secret to Mr. Pirates of the Caribbean? You kind of went off there. Anyway, apparently there's a crossover episode, or an episode called Cap'n Draken, and they were on a high seas school trip, which honestly sounds like the worst thing in the world. I remember my friend told me that his school went on a yachting trip. And I was like, what the fuck school did you go to go on a yachting trip? Ugh. Apparently John Cena was almost Ron Stoppable. And I really don't know how I feel about that. He just doesn't seem like the Ron Stoppable type. And his fun fact number 1 apparently is that Kim's middle name is Anne. Here's a fun fact for you. So Wade in Kim Possible is voiced by Taj Mowry, who is Tia and Tamara's little brother. Is that not a shock to the system? Let me shut my phone. That's crazy. What a successful family. And what a good song by Doja Cat, Rico Nasty. I love Rico Nasty. Also, it feels weird for me to say Rico Nasty because it's Rico Nasty. That sounds better than Rico Nasty. Australian accent strikes again. And then there's some more people who were in the show, such as... What's Miss Ma'am from... what's her face? Ashley Tisdale. She was in it. Melissa McCarthy was in it. There's just a bunch of people that is I never would have expected it. And then when I was told, I was like, this makes sense. And now I do be expecting it. How does GPS work? Well, let me tell you. So if you Google GPS, it comes up with the Global Positioning System, the GPS, which apparently is the American GPS. big lol. The American GPS is called GPS, and it was originally called Navstar GPS, and the definition of the American one is a satellite-based radio navigation system owned by the United States government and operated by the United States Space Force. That is interesting. The GPS is owned by the government and operated by the United States Space Force. So the government owns the GPS system. So that raises the question for me of, are there private GPS systems around the world, or are they all government controlled? I sense like a movie plotline around there somewhere. So when selective availability was lifted in 2000, which I'm guessing is like available to everyone, GPS had a 5-meter accuracy. And the latest stage of accuracy enhancement uses the L5 band, whatever the fuck that means. And that's now fully deployed. And the L5 band means that the accuracy is within 30 centimeters, which is pretty wild, right? You can pinpoint anywhere on the planet, well, assuming that you have the right amount of satellites, you can pinpoint anywhere within 30 centimeters. That's crazy. That's crazy. That's how Google Maps gets your position so accurately. One of the interesting things about Google Maps for me is the like positioning. So then if you're facing one way and you turn to face the other way, the phone turns with you, and then Google Maps gets that information of your phone's gyro to work out where it's facing and updates that on the map. That's so cool. Google Maps is really awesome. And it's crazy that it's free. Makes you think, how is it free? That information must be worth a lot. So much to think about. The GPS concept is based on time and the known position of GPS specialized satellites. The satellites carry very stable atomic clocks that are synchronized with one another and with the ground clocks. That might be like, what the fuck are you talking about? Well, let me get to that. There's a follow-up sentence here. Any drift from the time maintained on the ground is corrected daily. In the same manner, the satellite locations are noted with great precision. GPS receivers have clocks as well, but they are less stable, less precise. So GPS receivers, I'm assuming, is like your mobile phone. I don't know if this particular mobile phone, Miss Flip, had GPS. I don't think she did. But yeah. So the thing about the clocks, when I read that, I was like, now wait a second. That sounds very familiar, because that's related to what my thesis was on. And I remember I had written sentences about stable atomic clocks in space. So then I tried to find my thesis document and have a little browse and have a look at that. And I found it. And this was from my thesis proposal, so it's a little bit shit. But I might just read you the first sentence. Something a little bit fun. So the first sentence was, the Atomic Clock Ensemble in Space project will put a high-performance cold atom cesium atomic clock on the International Space Station, with the clock to be compared to high-performance frequency standards on the ground. And the main objective of the ACES project, that doesn't even make sense. Oh my God, why did I submit that? The main objectives of the ACES project are, no, that does make sense. Credit to 2017 me. The objectives are to test the gravitational shift of the ISS clock frequency predicted by general relativity and the search for variations in fundamental physics constants, relying on the core long-distance ground comparison. And that shit's something to do with lasers. God, reading this is such a throwback and makes me miss it so much. Anyway, yeah, I love really stable clocks that use atoms. And it sounds like, well, there's like an atom in a clock. Like, no, there's much more to it than that. And if you would like to research it, there's a lot of information available for free. When I was reading about GPS, there was a couple of topics that stood out. One of them was true range multilateration, which is, let me just pull up a tab for that. So it's a method to determine the location of a movable vehicle or a stationary point in space using multiple ranges between the vehicle and multiple spatially separated known locations. So that's like using multiple pings. So it's like, how long does it take for the information to ping to these points? And then you use the speed of the signal to work out how far it is. That's how speed cameras work. So if you drive past a speed, I don't know if they still work like that. At least that's how they worked past tense. So if you're driving and there's a speed camera, the speed camera sends a signal to you, bounces back, and the time it takes for the signal to return is how fast you're going, because it works out the distance and it has the time. Very interesting. So, and then it says a practical application using a fixed location is the trilateration method of surveying, blah, blah, blah. That's why you see people with those like big things and they're looking through it and you're like, oh no, they're pointing a laser at me. Like, no, it's surveying, Miss Ma'am. I also read a really interesting paper called On the Relativistic Doppler Effect for Precise Velocity Determination Using GPS. And I read it and I was like, oh, it's from Melbourne. It's from RMIT. So that was cool. So if you want to go and read that, that's a really good read too. There's a lot of maths in that one though. The Doppler effect, that is, let me see if I can explain this properly without completely messing it up. Doppler effect is like if you're standing on the street and a car is coming towards you and they're playing the radio, the song sounds different when the car is approaching you compared to when the car has gone past you because of the Doppler effect and the sound waves traveling to you and the sound waves traveling away from you. And that change in frequency and pitch changes how the signal sounds. I don't know. That's how it works. But that's, you can just say that, right? When you hear an ambulance come past and then it sounds different when it's going away, that's the Doppler effect. So if you want to be that bitch and be like, yo, that's the Doppler effect. People can't tell you that you're wrong because you're not wrong. You were right, Miss Girl, and you should say it. So the last thing is, how does Shazam work? I did a lot of reading on this and Shazam is fucking awesome. It's so cool. Basically, Shazam uses audio fingerprints. So you play a song and it uses a little algorithm, little moment. I think it uses Fourier transforms for my maths people to create audio fingerprints, and then it compares those with a database using target zones in the fingerprint. So it'll be like, these are the important parts, and then it compares those important parts with the database to work out if there's a matching thing or fingerprint that matches those target zones. And then it would have like a confidence coefficient, I'm guessing. And I was reading about how Shazam started, and originally people would call on their flip phones and play the song into the phone because you didn't have phone internet in the early 2000s. And then I think they had about 1 million songs in their database, and the same thing would happen. So I think then what would happen was you send the sound clip to Shazam. Shazam changes it into the fingerprint. They compare the fingerprints. Now I think the fingerprint stuff happens on your phone, maybe, or on your device. So it records it, gets the fingerprint, sends the fingerprint, and then compares the fingerprint. I remember I found like a fun little diagram here somewhere. Let me see if I can find it again. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, so the user phone using Shazam or an app that has Shazam, such as Snapchat. I think Google might use Shazam as well. Yep, so you record X seconds, fingerprinting algorithm, the fingerprint is sent to Shazam's frontal servers, and then Shazam checks if the fingerprint exists and returns the associated music. And that pulls from a very, very, very large music database, which is cool. So, yeah. I guess that's like a pretty decent overview of how Wi-Fi works, how mobile data works, how GPS works, and a little bit of a treat in terms of how my thesis worked. Sorry about how intensely technical this one was. Next week, as I said, it's not technical at all. We're just going to have fun. We're going to have a chat. We're going to talk about pop music, which is something that I love dearly. I think I've mentioned that a few times. Pop culture, and specifically pop culture history and pop music, I am a big fan. Big chunky fan. So that brings me to the end of everything that I wanted to cover for this episode of the podcast. Thank you all so much for listening. Sorry about the delay. My aim is the next one will be up next week. But if it doesn't, I'll let you know on Instagram and probably the YouTube notification thingy. I'm not on Twitter at the moment because Twitter hurts my brain. Let's just say that. Maybe I'll come back soon. I don't know. But I'm enjoying my little hiatus from Twitter. Thank you all so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. And I'll see you next week. Peace out. Bye.